Hey guys, tonight we are hovering right at the edge of something you do every single day, and yet almost never remember, this strange, slippery moment when you fall asleep. You're lying there now, or maybe sitting somewhere quiet, aware of the room, the faint hum of electricity, the distant traffic, or a fan chopping the air into soft, repetitive waves. Your body is still here, solid and heavy, but your thoughts already feel a little less cooperative. This is the zone where sentences trail off halfway through, where images flicker without context, where time begins to soften around the edges. And here's the uncomfortable truth: you probably won't survive tonight. No matter how hard you try, you almost never remember the exact moment you fall asleep. And you never will. Not in the way you think. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop a comment with your location and the local time, because somewhere else in the world, someone is waking up just as you're about to disappear for a while. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stay exactly where you are. Because this story doesn't begin with action, it begins with waiting. You're waiting for sleep to arrive, the way people wait for a bus that never announces itself, or for a friend who insists they're 5 minutes away. You think you'll notice when it happens. You always think that. Tonight, maybe you even tell yourself you'll catch it in the act. You'll stay alert, you'll observe, you'll remember. That confidence is adorable. As you lie there, your brain is already making quiet decisions without asking your permission. Modern neuroscience agrees on one mainstream fact that sets the tone for everything that follows. Memory formation requires attention. Without attention, experiences simply do not get written into long-term memory. This isn't philosophical, it's mechanical. The brain doesn't record everything like a security camera. It's more like a distracted intern, jotting down notes only when something seems important, surprising, or emotionally charged. And falling asleep inconveniently is none of those things. You notice your breathing before you notice your thoughts. It's slower now, deeper, a little heavier in the chest. You might try to control it for a moment, just to see if you still can, and that's fine. Control doesn't vanish instantly, it fades. The same way daylight doesn't switch off at sunset, but slides gradually into blue and then into black. This gradual slide is part of the problem. The brain is excellent at remembering beginnings and endings. It's terrible with transitions. Historians still argue whether this bias toward beginnings and endings shaped early storytelling traditions, or whether storytelling merely reflects how memory already works. Either way, the in-between moments, the boring, predictable, repetitive ones, tend to vanish without a trace. Sleep onset is the ultimate in-between moment. As you rest here, the brain areas responsible for sustained attention, the prefrontal cortex, if you want the technical name, begin to lose their grip. This same region is what helps you plan, self-monitor, and narrate your own experience. When it powers down, your internal narrator starts slurring its words. Sentences lose punctuation. Thoughts stop lining up politely. Here's a quirky tidbit scientists discovered while studying people drifting into sleep in laboratories. Many subjects insisted they were still awake, even after their brainwaves clearly showed early sleep patterns. In other words, your brain can already be asleep while you are confidently convinced you're not. That alone should make you suspicious of your ability to remember anything from this phase. You're still aware enough to think, though. Maybe your mind wanders to something trivial. What you forgot to do today? An unfinished message. An image that doesn't really belong to a full memory. These thoughts feel real in the moment, but they're fragile. They don't have the emotional weight or narrative structure that memory systems like to preserve. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes a lot of sense. Remembering how you fell asleep had no survival value. Your ancestors didn't need to recall the precise moment their consciousness dimmed. They needed to remember where the predators were, which plants made them sick, and which people they could trust. Evolution is ruthless about efficiency. Anything that doesn't help you survive or reproduce tends to get ignored. And so, as you lie here, the brain is already reallocating resources. Systems responsible for monitoring the external world slowly disengage. Internal maintenance crews start warming up. You can't see them, but they're there, stretching, clocking in for the night shift. There's something almost humorous about how hard people try to witness their own sleep. You might have tried it yourself, telling yourself, "I'm going to stay aware as I fall asleep." This is a bit like trying to watch your own eyes blink. The act of observing changes the process itself. Attention keeps you awake. Losing attention lets you sleep. The goal contradicts the method. Ancient philosophers noticed this long before EEG machines existed. Aristotle wrote about sleep as a state where perception withdraws inward, leaving the senses temporarily unmanned. Historians still argue whether he viewed sleep as a passive shutdown or an active state of internal processing. Either way, even then, people recognized that sleep arrives quietly, without ceremony. You might feel a brief jerk in your body, a hypnic jerk as it's called, like you're tripping on an invisible step. That sensation sometimes startles people awake just enough to notice it. And yet, even that doesn't mark the true moment of falling asleep. It's more like a door creaking as it closes, not the latch clicking shut. Your thoughts now are slower, less linear. One image bleeds into another. A sentence starts somewhere and ends nowhere. This is the brain's default mode network loosening its structure, allowing associations to drift without supervision. In waking life, this network helps you daydream. In sleep onset, it becomes the bridge to dreaming, but a bridge you never remember crossing. There's a subtle irony here. The closer you get to sleep, the less capable you are of remembering anything at all. Memory requires a working hippocampus, a small seahorse-shaped structure deep in the brain that acts like a librarian, deciding what gets shelved. As sleep approaches, that librarian starts packing up their desk. Researchers have observed that hippocampal activity drops sharply during the transition to sleep. This means that even if something mildly interesting happens, like a strange thought or a fleeting image, it never gets cataloged. It exists for a moment and then evaporates, like breath on glass. And this is where people often get frustrated. You wake up and think, "I don't remember falling asleep." It feels like a gap, a missing piece. But nothing went wrong. That gap is the system working exactly as intended. There's also a psychological component that adds to the illusion. Time perception depends on memory. If no memories are stored, time appears to vanish. This is why alarms feel like teleportation devices. One moment you're thinking about something trivial, the next moment it's morning, and hours feel like seconds. The night didn't pass quickly, it simply wasn't recorded. As you lie here now, you might briefly try to hold on to this moment, thinking, "This is it. I'm about to fall asleep." That thought itself is usually the last thing people remember. It's the final bookmark before the pages go blank. Some meditators and monks claim to remember the onset of sleep, and this has fueled debate for decades. Historians still argue whether such reports reflect genuine awareness during sleep onset or simply a well-trained ability to hover in a light sleep state without fully crossing over. Either way, these cases are rare, fragile, and not easily replicated. For most people, including you, most nights, sleep is a vanishing act performed without witnesses. And there's something gentle about that. The brain doesn't slam the door. It doesn't announce last call. It simply stops taking notes. and lets the lights dim one by one. Your job is not to catch it, not to document it, not to remember it. Your job is to let it happen. Right now, you're still close enough to waking life to understand these words. That won't last. And that's okay. In fact, it's necessary. The story of why you don't remember falling asleep can only be told while you're still awake enough to hear it. Soon, even this explanation will start to feel a little fuzzy, a little distant, like someone else's memory instead of your own. And that's exactly where we need to be. You don't feel a clean break between being awake and being asleep. Instead, consciousness thins out, like fog spreading across a field, and you are already standing ankle-deep in it without noticing when you stepped forward. The room around you hasn't vanished, but it has lost its authority. Sounds are still there, yet they no longer demand interpretation. The fan isn't a machine anymore. It's just a rhythm. Your own body feels less like a single object, and more like a collection of warm, loosely connected parts. This is the phase scientists call the hypnagogic state, and one mainstream fact about it is surprisingly simple. It is neurologically unstable. Your brain is rapidly switching between waking and sleeping patterns, sometimes several times per minute. Electrical activity shifts, snaps back, then slides again. From the outside, you look still. On the inside, it's controlled chaos. This instability is one of the main reasons memory fails here. Memory systems prefer consistency. They like clear signals, awake or asleep, important or irrelevant. The hypnagogic state offers none of that clarity. It's a flickering hallway between rooms, and the brain doesn't bother decorating it. You might notice images now, brief, half-formed scenes that don't belong to your actual life. A face you don't recognize. A place that feels familiar but isn't real. These are not dreams yet. They are mental sparks caused by sensory areas of the brain firing without coordination. Vision centers activate without eyes. Sound centers hum without ears. The brain is testing systems, warming them up, the way an orchestra tunes before a performance no one is meant to hear. Here's a quirky tidbit researchers discovered when asking people to report these images. Many insist the images are meaningful in the moment, but impossible to describe afterward. That's because meaning itself depends on memory. Without memory consolidation, even powerful impressions dissolve instantly. You may think you'll remember this part because it feels strange. But strangeness alone isn't enough. Emotional intensity matters more. Fear, excitement, embarrassment. Those get stored. Hypnagogic imagery is oddly neutral. It drifts by without urgency, like clouds you don't need to name. Long before modern labs, artists and inventors noticed this state and tried to exploit it. Thomas Edison famously held metal balls while falling asleep, letting them drop and wake him as he entered this twilight zone. He believed ideas surfaced there. Historians still argue whether Edison genuinely accessed creative insights or whether he simply romanticized a state that feels productive but rarely leaves tangible evidence. And that's the pattern again, experiences that feel rich in the moment but leave no record. As your awareness softens, your sense of self also loosens. The part of you that says, "This is happening to me," grows quieter. Neuroscientists link this to reduced activity in brain regions that maintain ego boundaries. When those regions dial down, experiences no longer feel anchored to a narrator. And without a narrator, memory has no author. You're still here, but you're less invested in being here. Thoughts now arrive without context. One pops up, maybe a word, maybe a color, and instead of following it, your mind lets it float away. This is not distraction. This is disengagement. Attention isn't pulled elsewhere. It simply stops gripping anything at all. There's a gentle paradox at work. To remember something, you need attention, but to sleep, attention must dissolve. The two goals are incompatible. This is why sleep researchers don't talk about falling asleep as a single event. It's a surrender, not a step. You might feel that surrender as heaviness, Muscles relax further. Signals from your body to your brain change frequency. The sensation of lying on the bed fades into something less defined. This isn't numbness. It's prioritization. The brain decides that detailed body mapping is unnecessary for the next several hours. Historians still argue whether early humans conceptualized sleep as a small death or a nightly journey. Many ancient cultures used the same words for sleep and forgetting. That overlap wasn't poetic coincidence. They noticed the same thing you're noticing now. Awareness fades before memory does, and memory fades before consciousness fully shuts off. You're probably no longer tracking time accurately. A minute could feel long, or it could vanish. That's because the brain's internal clock depends on sequential memory markers. Without those markers, duration collapses. This is why waiting for sleep feels endless, but sleeping itself feels instantaneous. If you try right now to recall exactly what you were thinking 30 seconds ago, it's already harder than it should be. That's not because you weren't thinking. It's because the storage process was already failing. This is also where people sometimes hear their name being called, or a sudden sound that isn't there. Auditory hallucinations are common in this state. They're harmless, fleeting, and usually forgotten. Another experience that happens but doesn't get saved. And that's the quiet theme threading through all of this. Things are happening. A lot of things. But nothing is being archived. You are not drifting into nothingness. You are drifting into maintenance, reorganization, quiet labor behind closed doors. The fact that you won't remember crossing this threshold doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means the brain has better uses for its storage space. Your job remains simple. Do nothing. Let the fog thicken. Let the hallway remain undecorated. The more you stop trying to notice sleep, the closer it gets. And soon, even the idea of noticing will feel unnecessary. Now, as you drift further, notice how the edges of reality begin to blur. Your vision isn't literally dimming, but your perception of the room, the walls, the furniture, the familiar clutter is losing definition. Shapes blend into one another. Shadows stretch and contract as if breathing. The world outside your mind is still present, but you're no longer fully participating. Attention, that faithful recorder of every detail, has checked out, leaving only the soft hum of awareness to patrol the territory. A mainstream neurological fact is that during this stage, known as the sleep onset or N1 phase, your brain exhibits theta wave activity. These slow, low-amplitude oscillations indicate that cortical regions are reducing their grip on perception. Your thoughts are still somewhat intact, but they are less structured. They drift, fragment, and dissolve like mist over a river. This is why memories from this phase are so notoriously unreliable. The very networks that encode experiences are beginning to power down. You may start experiencing fleeting images, faces, rooms, or landscapes that seem familiar but never truly existed. These hypnagogic hallucinations can be surreal, sometimes delightfully odd, other times mildly unsettling. Interestingly, studies have shown that up to 37% of people report seeing complex visual imagery just before fully falling asleep. Yet the vast majority of those images are gone before morning. Your brain is rehearsing scenarios that will never be stored. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some individuals report hearing snippets of conversations, song fragments, or even invented words during this stage, which can feel like eavesdropping on your own imagination. Some neuroscientists have noted that these fragments may represent early neural attempts to organize information for consolidation later in deeper sleep phases. Others argue it's simply random neural firing, with no functional purpose at all. Historians still debate whether ancient dream interpreters mistook hypnagogic phenomena for prophetic visions or spiritual encounters. Cultures across the world attributed these fleeting, sometimes vivid images to divine messages, even though we now know they are mostly products of a brain in transition. You feel your sense of self softening. It's subtle. The distinction between you and the room becomes less rigid. Thoughts and perceptions arrive and vanish without the ego's commentary. You are both observer and observed, but neither fully in control. Memory cannot yet anchor these moments because the hippocampus, the brain's archivist, is dialing down activity, preparing for the long night of consolidation ahead. Physiologically, your body continues to adjust. Heart rate slows slightly. Breathing deepens in rhythm, almost like a lullaby for your own nervous system. Muscles relax further. Even your eyes, beneath closed lids, begin gentle rolling movements, signaling that sleep stages are in motion. These physical cues might feel imperceptible, but they are vital signposts marking your journey deeper into unconscious processing. You might notice an odd sensation, the feeling of floating, sinking, or drifting without resistance. This is the vestibular system recalibrating as the brain reduces its processing of body position. People sometimes misinterpret this as actual levitation or slipping into another realm, which is why hypnagogic states inspired so much myth and superstition. Historians still argue whether stories of nightly journeys or astral travel originated from these universal physiological experiences. As you hover in this twilight state, consider the odd fact that you are simultaneously aware and unaware. Your consciousness is present enough to notice imagery, to feel drifting, to think fragmented thoughts, but not present enough to encode or retain them. The paradox is essential. The brain cannot both sleep and record in the same instant. Memory requires attention. Sleep requires absence of attention. They are mutually exclusive for now. Your mental images are not static, they flicker and morph. One face might melt into another. A room shifts, walls bending and stretching like a dream architect experimenting with space. You are experiencing a rehearsal of perception without responsibility, a nightly preview of the brain's future narratives. These rehearsals will later be sifted, sorted, and consolidated into more coherent forms, but this stage itself leaves no record. The humor is subtle but present. The brain is producing content, like a tiny playwright scripting scenes, yet it doesn't care if the author ever reads the script. All this effort goes unseen, unremembered. You are both the audience and the empty theater. And here's a gentle reminder. Attempting to capture these moments, to cling to them, often backfires. The more effort you exert to record or stabilize them, the more your attention pulls you away from the natural drift. Paradoxically, surrendering your awareness allows sleep and memory processes to function optimally. So, as your consciousness continues to thin, let the images come and go without judgment. Watch the flicker of faces, the shimmer of impossible places, the soft pull of disappearing thoughts. This is the secret rehearsal of your mind. No one will grade it. No one will remember it. And that is exactly the point. You are deeper now, though deeper is a strange word for something that feels more like loosening than descending. Your thoughts no longer arrive in sentences. They come as impressions, fragments, the emotional residue of ideas rather than the ideas themselves. If a thought once had edges, those edges have softened. Nothing demands completion. This is where the brain's gatekeeping systems truly begin their night shift. A mainstream fact worth anchoring here is that the hippocampus, the structure most responsible for forming new declarative memories, reduces its communication with the prefrontal cortex during early sleep. In plain terms, the librarian has stopped taking new books, even though the printing press is still running somewhere in the building. You might briefly surface with a sudden jolt, the sensation of falling. Your muscles twitch, your heart jumps. This hypnic jerk is so common that nearly everyone experiences it at some point. The leading explanation is neurological miscommunication. As muscles relax rapidly, the brain momentarily interprets the signal as loss of balance and fires a corrective response. A perfectly harmless glitch. and almost always forgotten by morning. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds made up but isn't. Some people are more likely to experience these jolts after caffeine, late-night exercise, or emotional stress. Your body is tired, but your nervous system hasn't fully received the memo. It's like showing up to a closed store and rattling the door once before giving up. Historians still argue whether ancient explanations for these jolts, such as the soul snapping back into the body, were metaphors or literal beliefs. Across cultures, this moment of sudden movement was interpreted as something escaping and returning, which says more about human intuition than neuroscience. If the jolt doesn't wake you fully, you sink again, smoother this time. Awareness thins further. The voice in your head, the one that narrates your day, has grown faint. It occasionally whispers, but it no longer insists on being heard. Without that narrator, experiences lose their timestamp. Memory encoding relies heavily on narrative continuity. When continuity dissolves, so does record-keeping. Your sensory world simplifies. Touch becomes generalized warmth. Sound becomes texture. Thought becomes atmosphere. You're not tracking what's happening. You're merely being present for it, and even that presence is passive. There's a subtle humor here if you're awake enough to notice it. Your brain is doing incredibly complex work, while making you feel like nothing at all is happening. Entire neural networks are shifting priorities, neurotransmitter levels are adjusting, and systems are coordinating the transition to deeper sleep. Yet subjectively, it feels like blankness approaching. Another mainstream fact slides in quietly. During this phase, levels of norepinephrine drop. This chemical is closely tied to alertness and memory formation. As it recedes, so does your ability to tag experiences as important. Events without importance don't get saved. They pass through like unmarked envelopes. You might sense time stretching again or collapsing entirely. The concept of before and after is losing relevance. Without norepinephrine-driven attention, the brain stops laying down temporal markers. This is why people often say they don't remember falling asleep. It's not a gap. It's a smooth erasure. Occasionally, a stray thought tries to organize itself. A plan, a worry, something you forgot to do. It arrives late, uninvited, like a guest showing up after the party has ended. But without chemical support, it can't stay long. It dissolves before it finishes forming. Remember earlier, when images flickered behind your closed eyes? Now even those are fading. Visual cortex activity is calming. The brain is less interested in simulation and more interested in sorting. What mattered today will be reviewed later, in deeper stages. What didn't matter is already gone. Here's where scholars still disagree. Some researchers argue that micro-memories from this stage influence dream content later in the night, even if you can't recall them directly. Others believe these fragments are entirely discarded, neural noise without consequence. The debate continues, quietly, much like this moment itself. Your breathing has found its slow, automatic rhythm. Each inhale arrives without effort. Each exhale lets go of a little more tension. You are no longer actively participating in the process of sleeping. Sleep is happening to you. And that, more than anything, explains why memory stops here. Memory requires agency. It requires someone paying attention. Right now, there is no one left to sign the receipt. You drift, not downward, not forward, but away from the need to notice. The threshold is crossed without ceremony, without documentation, without witnesses. And by the time you realize it might have happened, it already has. You are no longer hovering at the edge. You have slipped past it, and the transition itself has already been erased. If you try to locate the exact moment it happened, there is nothing to point to. No marker, no closing door. Just the sense that effort has ended and something else has taken over. This is where true light sleep, what researchers call N2, begins to dominate. A mainstream fact anchors this shift. N2 makes up nearly half of an average night's sleep. It is not dramatic, not dream-heavy, not memorable. It is, however, essential. This is where the brain commits fully to disengaging from the outside world. Your awareness now behaves differently. Instead of drifting freely, it settles into brief, shallow pockets. You may still surface for a second if there's a loud noise, but it takes more to pull you back. The brain has raised the threshold for interruption. This protective barrier is one reason you rarely remember falling asleep. By the time memory could register anything, the gate is already closing. Inside your brain, something quietly remarkable appears. Sleep spindles. These are short bursts of rapid brain activity, lasting a second or two, rippling across the cortex. Scientists know these spindles are linked to memory consolidation, especially for skills and learned patterns. The paradox is elegant. Your brain is actively strengthening memories at the exact moment it becomes incapable of forming new ones. Here's a quirky tidbit. People with higher spindle activity tend to perform better on learning tasks the next day, even though they have no awareness of the process happening overnight. It's like a personal assistant reorganizing your desk while you're asleep, then disappearing before you wake up. Historians still argue whether medieval descriptions of dreamless rest correspond to what we now label N2 sleep, or whether cultural expectations shaped how people reported their nights. In many historical accounts, sleep wasn't one long block, but a series of segments, and memory of transitions was rarely mentioned. Just like now, your muscles are even more relaxed. Not completely offline, that comes later, but quiet enough that movement feels unnecessary. If you shift at all, it happens without narrative. No commentary. No decision-making. The body adjusts itself the way a cat does, efficiently and without explanation. Thought, if it appears, is faint and incomplete. It doesn't unfold, it doesn't argue, it barely exists. This is important because memory formation depends on elaboration. A thought must connect to other thoughts to be saved. Here, nothing connects. Everything is isolated, momentary, and disposable. Sound still reaches you, but it's filtered. The fan hum blends into breathing. Distant noises are noted only as changes in texture. The brain's thalamus, the sensory relay station, is actively dampening input. It's deciding what gets through and what doesn't. Most of it doesn't. There's something almost humorous about how much effort goes into making you feel like nothing is happening. Chemical signals shift. Networks synchronize. Electrical rhythms settle into patterns refined by millions of years of evolution. And your subjective experience? Near blankness. Another mainstream fact slides by quietly. During N2 sleep, body temperature begins to drop slightly. This isn't accidental. Cooler temperatures support deeper sleep stages. Your brain is preparing the environment from the inside out, adjusting conditions without asking for your input. Some fringe researchers have suggested that N2 sleep acts as a psychological buffer, smoothing the emotional spikes of the day before deeper processing begins. Others disagree, arguing its role is purely mechanical, gating, sorting, stabilizing. The debate continues, but either way, this stage remains largely invisible to memory. You might briefly surface into awareness and think, "I'm still awake." But that thought doesn't finish forming. It evaporates before it can be labeled. This is why people underestimate how quickly they fall asleep. Consciousness fades before the story can be told. Remember how earlier images flickered and twisted? They're gone now. This stage is not creative, it's administrative. No scenery, No symbolism, just quiet maintenance. And here's the gentle truth. Even if something were to happen right now, you wouldn't remember it. Not because your brain is broken, but because it's busy doing something more important than recording. You are being reorganized. The night is no longer approaching. It has arrived, quietly, without asking for permission, and without leaving a receipt. You are firmly inside the night now, held in a steady rhythm that no longer belongs to the clock on your wall. Time, as you knew it earlier, has stopped reporting for duty. What replaces it is cadence, cycles, waves, repetition without awareness. You are not traveling forward. You are circulating. A mainstream fact settles in here. Sleep unfolds in repeating cycles, each lasting roughly 90 minutes. Within those cycles, the brain moves gradually from lighter sleep toward deeper stages, then back up again. You are early in one of these loops, and the loop itself will repeat several times before morning, unnoticed and unremembered. Your brain waves have slowed further. Delta activity is beginning to appear, heavier and more synchronized than anything before. These waves are the signature of deep, restorative sleep approaching. They are blunt instruments compared to the sharp spikes of wakefulness. Nothing fancy, nothing precise, just power and consistency. Memory at this point has fully relinquished its grip on the present. The hippocampus is no longer interested in new input. Instead, it turns inward, replaying patterns from the day at accelerated speeds. This replay is a mainstream finding in sleep research. Neurons that fired together while you were awake fire together again now, sometimes compressed into fractions of their original duration. Here's the strange part. You are not watching this replay. There is no audience. The work happens behind a curtain. You might imagine it like a cleaning crew entering a theater after closing hours, resetting seats, sweeping floors, fixing what broke during the show. By the time the audience returns, everything looks effortless. A quirky tidbit from animal studies adds color here. Rats navigating mazes show the same neural firing patterns during sleep that they showed while running but played back in reverse. Some researchers think this reverse replay helps strengthen memory pathways. Others argue it may help prune irrelevant connections. Historians still argue whether reverse replay serves learning, forgetting, or both simultaneously. Your body follows the brain's lead. Blood pressure drops. Muscles go slacker still. Even your immune system shifts gears, increasing production of certain protective cells. Sleep is not passive rest, it is scheduled maintenance. If you were to wake suddenly now, you would feel disoriented. Not groggy exactly, more like misplaced. That's because your brain's map of now has been temporarily archived. Orientation depends on memory. Without it, even a familiar room feels wrong. This disorientation is one reason deep sleep guards itself so fiercely. The brain does not want interruptions here. The thalamus continues to dampen sensory input, and sleep spindles occasionally flare again, acting like noise-canceling bursts against the outside world. You are no longer generating images. No faces, no landscapes. Those belong to the threshold. This stage is dream-poor by design. Dreaming requires narrative integration, and right now the brain is focused on structural work. Storytelling comes later. There's a subtle irony worth noticing, if you could notice it. This is the stage people most desperately want more of, the deep, refreshing sleep that leaves you feeling restored. And yet it is the stage you are least aware of, least able to remember, least able to describe. Its effectiveness depends on its invisibility. Some fringe theories suggest that consciousness briefly flickers, even in deep sleep, tiny sparks of awareness that vanish instantly. Others reject this, arguing that true deep sleep is a near-total shutdown of subjective experience. The debate remains unresolved, partly because memory cannot testify. You breathe slowly now, effortlessly. Each breath arrives on time, leaves without ceremony. Your chest rises and falls like a tide that has forgotten the shore. Nothing needs your supervision. The day you lived is being quietly edited. Some moments are being reinforced, others softened, others discarded entirely. You will never know which choices were made or why. You will only feel the result later, as intuition, skill, or calm. And still, you do not remember falling asleep. That moment is far behind you now, buried under layers of neural activity that never asked to be witnessed. You are resting in the truest sense, not aware, not recording, not narrating, just existing while unseen systems do their ancient work. You are deeper still, wrapped in a kind of quiet that has weight to it. Not silence exactly, more like the absence of urgency. Nothing is calling for you, nothing is waiting. The world has narrowed to a steady internal rhythm that feels older than thought. This is where slow-wave sleep takes center stage. A mainstream fact grounds this moment. Slow-wave sleep is dominated by high-amplitude delta waves, the slowest brain activity you experience all night. These waves reflect large populations of neurons firing together, then resting together, like a crowd breathing in unison. Coordination has replaced complexity. Your brain is no longer multitasking. It is focused on restoration. Synaptic connections, the tiny junctions where neurons communicate, are being adjusted. Some are strengthened, others are weakened. This process, often called synaptic downscaling, helps prevent the brain from becoming overloaded with information. Without it, learning would eventually grind to a halt. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels counterintuitive. During this stage, your brain cells actually shrink slightly. It's temporary and harmless. The shrinkage creates more space between cells, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to wash through more efficiently, clearing out metabolic waste. You are literally being rinsed from the inside. Historians still argue whether ancient beliefs about sleep as a cleansing ritual were symbolic or rooted in observation. Many cultures associated deep sleep with purification, renewal, or spiritual washing, ideas that turn out to be surprisingly close to modern neuroscience. Your awareness, if it exists at all, is fragmentary. There is no storyline here, no sense of "I am asleep." Even that idea requires memory and perspective. You are not unconscious in the way a switch flips off. You are submerged, held beneath the surface of experience. If a sound reaches you now, it arrives distorted, stripped of meaning. The brain evaluates it quickly. Threat or no threat. Almost everything is labeled no threat and discarded before it ever touches awareness. This is why alarms feel so violent. They must punch through layers of protective filtering. Your body temperature continues its slow decline. This drop supports the metabolic processes unfolding inside your brain. It's another reminder that sleep is not one thing, but many systems cooperating toward the same goal: survival through maintenance. Dreaming is minimal here, but not entirely absent. When images do appear, they are simple: shapes, motions, emotional tones without narrative. Some researchers suggest these fragments influence later dreams. Others believe they are merely byproducts of neural recalibration. Historians still argue whether early dream reports overlooked this stage because it lacked symbolism. There is a faint humor to the situation. This is arguably the most important sleep stage for physical and cognitive health, yet it is the least glamorous. No cinematic dreams, no insights, no stories to tell in the morning, just deep, anonymous labor. Your muscles are relaxed to the point of near stillness. Reflexes are dampened. Movement would feel unnecessary, even if you were aware enough to consider it. The body has agreed, collectively, to pause. You are not processing the day emotionally here. That comes later. You are preparing the ground, clearing space, making sure the structure can hold whatever tomorrow brings. And this is another reason you rarely remember falling asleep. Memory doesn't simply turn off at one moment, it is crowded out. This deep, synchronized activity leaves no room for narrative encoding. There is nothing to attach a memory to. If you could step outside yourself and observe, you would see something peaceful and methodical. From the inside, there is almost nothing at all. You remain here for a while, longer than you realize. Time stretches, then collapses, then stops mattering altogether. The night continues its quiet work without commentary. You rest, not as an experience, but as a state. You are still here, but here no longer has coordinates. The idea of location has thinned out, along with the idea of sequence. Nothing follows anything else. There is just a steady condition, like being held in deep water, where movement is possible but unnecessary. This is the heart of deep sleep, and a mainstream fact fits quietly into place. This stage is when growth hormone is released in its highest concentrations. Despite the name, it is not just for growing children. In adults, it repairs tissue, supports immune function, and helps regulate metabolism. Your body is using the night to rebuild itself piece by piece. Your brain continues its slow, synchronized rhythm. Neurons fire together, rest together, and repeat. This pattern is efficient. It conserves energy while accomplishing a great deal. The networks responsible for self-reflection, planning, and memory narration are almost completely offline. There is no inner monologue left to comment on the process. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds almost mythic. During this stage, your brain's waste removal system becomes dramatically more active, flushing out byproducts linked to neurodegenerative disease. Some researchers compare it to a nightly cleaning cycle. Others caution against oversimplification. Historians still argue whether this process alone explains the long-term cognitive benefits of deep sleep, or whether it is only one piece of a larger puzzle. You are not dreaming in any recognizable way. If imagery appears at all, it lacks story, characters, or perspective. There is no you inside it. It's closer to sensation than vision, closer to mood than thought. And because memory depends on structure, none of this will be recalled. Your body remains mostly still, but small adjustments happen automatically. Muscles release tension in tiny increments. Joints settle. Breathing remains slow and regular. The nervous system is in a state of dominance by its parasympathetic branch, the one responsible for rest and repair. You are as far from urgency as the human body ever gets. If someone were to wake you now, you would feel heavy, confused, maybe even irritated. That sensation is called sleep inertia. It happens because your brain is operating at a low metabolic tempo, and sudden wakefulness requires a rapid shift that the system resists. Another reason deep sleep protects itself from memory and interruption. There's a subtle irony here worth mentioning. People who worry most about sleep often get less of this stage. Anxiety keeps the brain alert, delaying or fragmenting deep sleep. Yet this stage is exactly what calms the nervous system over time. It's a loop, broken only by letting go. Some fringe theories suggest that deep sleep briefly returns the brain to a more childlike state, with heightened plasticity and reduced self-boundaries. Others dismiss this as poetic overreach. Historians still argue whether ancient descriptions of becoming like a child in sleep reflected observation or metaphor. You remain unaware of all of this. That's not a failure, it's the design. Consciousness is expensive, memory is selective. This stage demands both step aside. The night holds you steady, doing work that cannot be supervised, recorded, or remembered. You do not fall asleep here. You are already asleep, and have been for some time. Something begins to shift, though you won't notice it happening. There is no signal, no announcement, no sensation that says, now we're moving on. The brain does not transition the way stories do. It transitions the way tides do, quietly, by degrees, without consulting the shore. A mainstream fact marks this change. After a period of deep, slow-wave sleep, the brain naturally starts drifting upward again toward lighter stages. This is not waking. It's repositioning. The cycle is resetting itself so that a different kind of work can begin. Electrical activity in your brain becomes a little less synchronized. Delta waves soften. Faster rhythms sneak back in. The brainstem increases its activity, subtly adjusting neurotransmitter levels. Acetylcholine begins to rise, a chemical closely tied to attention and memory, but not enough to wake you, just enough to prepare the ground. This is where dreaming in a more recognizable form becomes possible. Here's the strange part. The memory systems are still mostly offline. So even though narratives are about to appear, the mechanisms that would normally record them are unreliable. You are entering a phase where experiences happen again, but are not yet meant to be kept. A quirky tidbit slips in here. Early sleep researchers once believed dreams only happened in one specific stage. We now know that dreamlike imagery can occur throughout the night, but the vivid, story-driven dreams people remember usually emerge later. What you're approaching now is a kind of rehearsal space for dreaming, ideas without commitment. Historians still argue whether early dream journals, which often focus on dramatic scenes, ignored these subtler dream phases, or whether people simply forgot them by morning. The absence of memory makes it hard to know what was never experienced versus what was simply never stored. Your body remains deeply relaxed. Muscles are quiet. Breathing is steady. But inside your skull, things are warming up. Neural networks responsible for emotion, imagery, and association are beginning to communicate again. They speak softly at first, like neighbors turning on lights before dawn. Images may begin to form, but they are hazy. A sense of movement without destination. A color without an object. An emotional tone without a cause. These fragments don't cohere yet. There is no you inside them. No perspective. Just activity. This is another key reason you don't remember falling asleep. Memory does not resume all at once. It returns gradually, unevenly, like a city grid powering back on after an outage. Some neighborhoods light up before others. The memory district is one of the last. You might think dreaming equals remembering, but that's a misconception. Dreaming is experience. Remembering requires tagging that experience as important. Right now, the tagging system is still muted. There's a quiet efficiency to this design. If you remembered every fragment of nocturnal imagery, your waking mind would be cluttered with noise. Forgetting is not a flaw, it's filtration. Some fringe theories suggest these early dream fragments influence your mood the next day without ever becoming conscious memories. Others argue mood changes are driven by biochemical shifts alone. Historians still argue whether the emotional residue of dreams matters more than the dreams themselves. You remain unaware of any of this. From your perspective, nothing has changed. And that's the point. The night continues its cycles, layering one state over another, each erasing the memory of the last. You are carried forward, not by awareness, but by rhythm. You are drifting upward again, though not toward wakefulness, toward something looser, stranger, and quietly theatrical. The brain is changing its posture. It's no longer focused on repair alone. It's beginning to tell stories, even if no one is listening. A mainstream fact anchors this transition. This is the approach to REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where brain activity starts to resemble wakefulness in surprising ways. The cortex becomes active. Emotional centers light up, yet the body remains safely immobilized. You are mentally busy and physically still, a combination that explains both the vividness and the vulnerability of this state. Your eyes begin to move beneath closed lids, tracing paths across imaginary scenes. These movements are not random. They correlate with visual imagery unfolding in the mind. Long ago, scientists debated whether the eyes were reacting to dreams or helping generate them. Historians still argue whether REM eye movements are passive reflections or active participants in dream construction. Here's a quirky tidbit. During REM sleep, the brain's logical oversight, the prefrontal cortex, is significantly quieter than during waking life. This is why dreams accept impossible scenarios without protest. Flying feels normal. Time folds. People change, faces mid-conversation. The internal editor has stepped away. Memory, however, is only partially online. You are experiencing again, vividly this time, but the ability to store those experiences remains unreliable. Emotional impressions may be strengthened. Sensory detail may be rich, but sequence, context, and authorship, the things memory needs, are still shaky. Your body is effectively paralyzed now, a safety mechanism to prevent you from acting out dreams. Muscles are inhibited at the spinal level. This paralysis is complete enough that even if your dream self is running, fighting, or dancing, your physical body stays still. Most people never notice this because they never wake during it. If you did wake, you might feel trapped for a moment, unable to move. That experience, sleep paralysis, has inspired centuries of folklore. Shadowy figures, pressure on the chest, the sense of presence. Historians still argue whether medieval accounts of night demons were early descriptions of REM intrusion into waking consciousness. Dreams now have narrative. Not logical narrative, but emotional continuity. Scenes follow one another because they feel connected, not because they make sense. The hippocampus is active enough to simulate continuity, but not enough to guarantee recall. This is another reason you rarely remember falling asleep. The brain transitions from forgetful quiet to unforgettable strangeness without ever restoring the bridge between experience and memory. When the bridge finally comes back, the early parts are already lost. There's a subtle humor here. Dreams often feel deeply meaningful while you're in them, yet evaporate on waking. Your brain invests enormous creative energy into experiences it fully expects to delete. Some researchers suggest this is intentional, that dreams explore emotional possibilities without cluttering long-term memory. Others believe dreams are side effects of memory consolidation rather than tools themselves. The debate continues, unresolved and unbothered. You are now immersed in a private theater, lights on, audience absent. The show plays anyway. And still, you do not remember falling asleep. That moment is ancient history now, overwritten by cycles that had no reason to record it. You are dreaming now fully, though the word "you" has become flexible. Perspective shifts without explanation. Sometimes you are inside the scene, sometimes you are watching it. Sometimes there is no clear vantage point at all. The dream does not care. It is not trying to be remembered. It is trying to be felt. A mainstream fact grounds this state. During REM sleep, the amygdala and other emotional centers are highly active, while regions responsible for critical reasoning remain subdued. This imbalance explains why dreams are emotionally vivid yet logically fragile. Feelings are amplified. Rules are optional. Your brain is busy integrating memory fragments, faces you've seen, places you've passed, emotions you've carried, all rearranged into new combinations. This process is often described as memory consolidation, but it's less like filing documents and more like remixing them. The original order is irrelevant. Emotional relevance takes priority. Here's a quirky tidbit from dream research. People are far more likely to remember dreams if they wake during REM sleep rather than after it. That doesn't mean REM dreams are stronger. It means memory briefly reconnects while the experience is still active. Timing, not intensity, determines recall. Historians still argue whether ancient dream interpreters correctly sensed the emotional importance of dreams or whether they overestimated their predictive power. Dreams feel significant because the brain's emotional amplifiers are turned up, not because the content carries hidden messages. Your dream scenes shift effortlessly. A street becomes a hallway. A conversation becomes a chase. Characters merge. You accept all of it without resistance, because the brain region that normally flags inconsistency is quiet. This acceptance is essential. Questioning would interrupt the process. Memory formation remains selective. Strong emotional tones, fear, joy, curiosity, are more likely to leave traces. Neutral details dissolve. This is why dreams often survive as feelings rather than stories. You wake knowing you dreamed, but not what you dreamed. Your body remains motionless, safely disconnected from the drama unfolding in your mind. This disconnect allows the brain to simulate experiences without risk. You can fall, fly, argue, reconcile, all without consequences. Some fringe theories suggest dreaming serves as emotional rehearsal, preparing you for real-world challenges. Others argue it's simply a byproduct of memory systems working overnight. Historians still argue whether dreams evolved for function or are merely tolerated side effects of a complex brain. Time behaves strangely here. Minutes stretch into lifetimes. Entire narratives unfold in moments. This distortion happens because the brain is no longer tracking real-world time. Sequence exists only within the dream itself. You are immersed, but not recording. The archivist is still half asleep. And this, again, is why the transition into sleep is lost. By the time experience returns in full color, the memory machinery is still unreliable. When it finally re-engages, it only catches the tail end of the story. You dream on, unconcerned with recall, letting scenes form and dissolve as needed. The night continues its quiet editing, shaping you in ways you will never directly witness. The dream loosens its grip, not abruptly but gradually. Like fog thinning without announcing the sun. Sensation returns before clarity. There is weight in your limbs again, though you have not yet decided to move them. Thought flickers on and off, unstable, drifting between worlds. This threshold state, neither fully asleep nor fully awake, is known as hypnopompia. Neuroscientists describe it as a period of partial neural reboot. Sensory systems come back online first. Memory follows later, if it follows at all. This sequence explains why you may feel awake while still thinking in fragments. During this phase, the brain begins restoring executive control. The prefrontal cortex, long subdued, slowly resumes its role as editor and gatekeeper. Logic reappears, but it is rusty. Associations remain loose. Ideas slide into one another without friction. Many people experience fleeting hallucinations here. A voice calling your name, the sensation of falling, a presence in the room. These are not intrusions from outside reality, but leftovers from dream imagery overlapping with waking perception. The boundary between inner and outer has not yet sealed. A practical observation from sleep labs is that attempts to analyze a dream immediately upon waking often disrupt recall rather than preserve it. The act of rational interrogation activates neural circuits that overwrite fragile memory traces. Ironically, trying too hard to remember can erase what little remains. This is why dream journaling advice often emphasizes stillness. Remaining motionless allows memory fragments to stabilize before sensory input floods the system. Even light exposure can shift the brain fully into waking mode, closing the archive prematurely. Emotion lingers longer than imagery. You may wake with a sense of relief, anxiety, or tenderness, even when the narrative is gone. These emotional residues are more robust because they are encoded across multiple neural systems, not just visual or linguistic ones. Here is an often overlooked detail. Heart rate and breathing patterns during REM sleep can influence dream tone. A racing heart can color a dream with urgency or fear. A slow, steady rhythm often accompanies calmer imagery. Upon waking, these physiological signals fade, but their emotional imprint may persist. Culturally, many traditions treat this waking threshold as sacred or dangerous, a moment when truths slip away or insights briefly surface. From a scientific perspective, it is simply a handoff between operating systems. One mode shuts down, while another initializes. You may notice time behaving oddly here as well. Seconds feel longer. Decisions take effort. This sluggishness reflects the gradual synchronization of neural networks that were previously operating independently during sleep. Eventually, the dream world recedes entirely. Language firms up. Identity reasserts itself. You remember your name, your place, your obligations. The night's internal theater closes without applause. Most of what occurred will never be accessible again. Not because it was unimportant, but because the brain did not deem it necessary to store. Efficiency, not sentimentality, governs memory. And yet, something remains altered. Connections have been tested. Emotions have been processed. Associations have been quietly updated. You rise carrying the results, even if you cannot recall the work. The night has finished another unseen revision. You move through the day unaware that parts of your mind are still half asleep, still humming softly from the night's labor. Memory consolidation does not end when you open your eyes. It simply changes pace, like a factory shifting from night shift to day shift without turning off the lights. As you walk, sit, scroll, sip something warm, the brain quietly tests what it saved. New experiences brush up against freshly organized memories. Some stick, others bounce off. This constant comparison is how relevance is measured. If something connects, it stays. If it does not, it fades. Neuroscientists call this process reconsolidation. Every time a memory is recalled, even casually, it becomes briefly unstable, like a document open for editing. During that window, details can be strengthened, altered, or lost. Memory is not a vault, it is a draft. This explains why memories can change over time without your consent. Each recall subtly rewrites the original. You are not retrieving a file, you are re-rendering it. Accuracy is sacrificed for usefulness, which is why confidence in a memory does not guarantee truth. There is a mainstream finding that surprises many people. Sleep after learning improves performance more than additional practice without sleep. Musicians play more accurately. Athletes move more efficiently. Students recall more. The gains occur even when the sleeper is not dreaming about the task. The brain, it seems, practices in silence. A quirkier detail comes from studies showing that odors present during learning, when reintroduced during sleep, can enhance recall the next day. Smell, wired closely to memory centers, can act as a silent cue, nudging specific neural patterns to replay. It is one of the few senses that bypasses the thalamus entirely. Historians still argue whether ancient perfumers and priests understood this connection intuitively, using incense not just for ritual atmosphere, but for memory anchoring. The evidence is circumstantial, but the overlap is intriguing. As the day progresses, attention competes with memory, multitasking fragments encoding. Notifications interrupt consolidation. The brain evolved to prioritize survival cues, not message previews. Each interruption forces a context switch, leaving memory traces shallower than they could be. Emotion remains a powerful amplifier. Events tagged with fear, joy, or novelty recruit the amygdala, which signals the hippocampus to pay attention. Neutral information must work harder to earn storage. This is why you remember embarrassing moments vividly but forget where you put your keys. Sleep deprivation disrupts this balance. Without adequate rest, the brain struggles to distinguish what matters. Everything feels equally urgent, equally foggy. Memory becomes noisy, crowded with low-value details. There is an ongoing scholarly debate about whether memory decline with age reflects storage loss or retrieval difficulty. Some researchers argue the memories remain intact but harder to access, like mislabeled boxes rather than missing ones. Others suggest structural degradation plays a larger role. What is clear is that sleep quality predicts memory resilience across the lifespan. Deep sleep decreases with age, but even small improvements, consistent schedules, reduced light exposure can produce measurable cognitive benefits. You may notice flashes of insight during mundane moments, in the shower, on a walk, just before sleep. These are not accidents. They are delayed integrations, the brain finally connecting pieces it organized earlier. The night's work continues to reveal itself in daylight, quietly, without ceremony. You carry forward not the dreams themselves, but their outcomes. And tonight, whether you notice or not, the cycle will begin again. Even as you sip your coffee or step into sunlight, the brain is still at work, silently rearranging and integrating. You move through ordinary routines, but your mind is processing extraordinary complexity. Connections, associations, and emotional patterns formed long before awareness caught up. A mainstream fact illuminates this. During waking hours, the hippocampus continues to interact with the neocortex, gradually transferring and embedding memories. This offline consolidation ensures that short-term experiences are translated into long-term knowledge, a process that is invisible to you yet vital for learning. Quirky observations from neuroscience add flavor. Studies show that simply walking or pacing while thinking can enhance memory recall. The body's movement, subtle as it may seem, provides rhythmic cues that help the brain stabilize fragile traces. Think of it as gently shaking a jar so the layers settle naturally. Historians still argue whether the mental habits of pre-industrial societies, long walks, labor-intensive routines, improved memory retention, or were incidental to lifestyle. Either way, the pattern hints at a timeless interplay between movement and cognition. Your emotional state acts as a silent editor, prioritizing what matters for later retrieval. Strong emotional responses during the day, frustration, delight, surprise, are preferentially encoded. Neutral or repetitive moments are often blurred or discarded. This selective tagging is why you might vividly recall a minor humiliation, but forget an entire mundane afternoon. Your sensory systems feed into this process too. Subtle environmental cues, like the smell of rain or the hum of a fan, may trigger memory fragments from the previous night. These cues can evoke feelings or mental imagery that feel spontaneous, yet they are residues of the sleep-based reorganization. Here's a curious fact. Even brief microsleeps, the second-long dips into sleep that occur during monotonous activities, can influence memory consolidation. Though fleeting, these micro-rests allow the brain to process patterns and stabilize connections without your awareness. It's sleep, quietly hiding in plain sight. Historians still argue whether historical accounts of daydreaming or moments of inspiration might correspond to similar unconscious processing. Ancient observers noticed flashes of insight, but lacked language or tools to quantify the neurological underpinnings. You may notice sudden insights or intuitive leaps at odd times. A solution to a problem appears in the shower, or a melody returns unexpectedly. These moments are byproducts of nocturnal processing that have been integrated and released during conscious activity. They are the echo of sleep, not the memory of it. The brain's efficiency is remarkable. It discards redundant details, strengthens associations, and primes emotional responses for the future, all without demanding attention. It is simultaneously invisible and indispensable. Even as the day continues, memory remains fragile. You can try to recall your dreams or the exact moment you fell asleep, but the neural machinery responsible is still partially offline, and the gap between experience and conscious recollection is vast. By the evening, the first whispers of preparation for the next sleep cycle begin. Hormonal shifts, melatonin secretion, core body temperature decline, signal the brain and body to reset. The transition from wakefulness back to sleep is another carefully orchestrated handoff. And so, the cycle continues, seamlessly, invisibly. Memory works while awareness rests, forming the hidden scaffolding of cognition. You live your day unaware, but the night's labor is never wasted. You have moved far from the initial moment of slipping into sleep, yet every step of today is subtly shaped by what occurred while you were unconscious. Night approaches again, and the brain begins its quiet preparations for sleep, even as you finish your day. The signals are subtle. Your core temperature dips, melatonin begins to rise, and a gentle fatigue spreads through your body. You may think this is merely tiredness, but it is the opening act of a highly orchestrated neural symphony. A mainstream fact anchors this. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, your internal circadian clock, coordinates sleep timing by signaling hormonal and neuronal changes. It ensures that when darkness falls, the body and brain are ready to switch modes, even before you are consciously aware of the transition. Here's a quirky tidbit. Exposure to blue light from screens delays melatonin production, subtly reshaping the timeline of your internal rehearsal. One study found that even a short burst of evening screen time can push sleep onset later and reduce the proportion of deep, restorative cycles. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial humans noticed similar environmental influences, or if their routines shielded them from such modern disruptions. You notice a softening in attention, a hazy spacing of thoughts. This is sleep pressure, the accumulation of adenosine in the brain's cortex, which signals readiness for rest. Awareness becomes fuzzy, words slow, and focus drifts naturally toward inertia. The body instinctively gravitates toward rest. Memory is already winding down its day-to-day integration. Hippocampal activity subtly decreases, allowing the neocortex to take the lead in organizing the day's experiences. Emotional regulation also begins its nighttime work, smoothing over minor irritations and amplifying feelings that have long-term relevance. Fringe research adds an interesting note. Certain patterns of daytime experience, like repetitive learning or emotional intensity, can predict the content of upcoming dream fragments. Your brain, in effect, prepares a rehearsal for memory consolidation, using imagination to tag what matters most. You lie down, sensing the familiar pull of bed, and your body conforms naturally. The parasympathetic system dominates. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, and muscles relax in sequence, preparing you for the first threshold of sleep. Sensory input begins to fade. Sounds are filtered. Light is softened. You are no longer in the day, though you may still feel a trace of awareness. This liminal state is the precursor to sleep onset, an almost imperceptible bridge between wakefulness and unconscious processing. Your mind is still partly awake, yet disconnected. Thought fragments float without coherence. Images and feelings drift past like clouds, momentarily visible, then gone. You may sense anticipation, nostalgia, or fleeting curiosity, but without memory anchoring, none of it will persist. Historians still argue whether pre-modern humans recognized these transitions in the same way we now measure them with polysomnography. Descriptions in diaries and early medical texts hint at an intuitive awareness. "The mind softens before the body sleeps," they wrote. They were observing the same process your brain is executing tonight, silently and flawlessly. The night's work is about to resume. Deep sleep, REM cycles, emotional rehearsal, and memory consolidation are all cued in the hidden machinery of your nervous system. And you will drift into it without a single conscious step, leaving no recollection of the exact moment you fell asleep. The threshold is close now. The mind softens. Awareness thins. The work is ready to begin. You cross the threshold again, settling into darkness, not just around you, but within you. Your body feels heavier, yet buoyant in its stillness. Limbs relax, shoulders drop, and the chest rises and falls with a rhythm you hardly notice. The brain is quietly shifting gears, preparing to repeat its nightly rituals of restoration and integration. A mainstream fact grounds this stage. As you enter non-REM sleep, especially the deeper stages, slow-wave activity dominates once more. Delta waves surge through your cortex, synchronizing widespread neuronal networks. The brain temporarily suspends complex thought to focus on repair, growth, and metabolic housekeeping. A quirky observation: in this deep sleep, the glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance mechanism, becomes dramatically more active. Cerebrospinal fluid flows in pulsating waves, washing away metabolic byproducts like beta amyloid that, if accumulated, are linked to cognitive decline. Essentially, you are being rinsed clean while dreaming obliviously. Historians still argue whether ancient metaphors about sleep as purification were poetic or based on careful observation. Rituals that included night rest, incense, or baths may have coincidentally aligned with these biological processes, lending early sleep practices a subtle but real physiological benefit. Your emotions are suspended in a protective haze. The amygdala and limbic system remain somewhat active, processing residual stress or unresolved feelings from the day. Yet your conscious awareness cannot grasp this work. You feel calm, untroubled, sometimes blissfully oblivious, though the brain is actively negotiating emotional landscapes. Your sensory input is minimal. Sounds are filtered to essentials. Vibrations or sudden noises are assessed, but most are ignored. Light is muted. Taste, touch, and smell are on standby. You are enveloped in the safety of controlled isolation, the perfect laboratory for memory consolidation. Here's a fringe insight. Studies suggest that certain neural circuits during deep sleep replay sequences of the day's learning, subtly testing and strengthening synaptic connections. Musicians, athletes, and students unknowingly practice while doing nothing. Sleep is performance without performance, rehearsal without conscious participation. Your body temperature dips further, facilitating enzymatic activity and improving tissue repair. The parasympathetic nervous system maintains dominance, slowing heart rate and respiration. Even your skin's blood flow adjusts to optimize recovery. You are a living organism running invisible maintenance protocols. Memory encoding remains offline but is being silently reorganized. Important neural patterns are tagged for later storage in the cortex. Less relevant information is allowed to fade. This triage ensures that tomorrow, your mental landscape is clear enough to learn anew. There is humor hidden here. The most intense cognitive housekeeping occurs when you are entirely oblivious. You invest energy, process complexity, and prune inefficiency, yet wake to no applause. The mind's invisible labor is perhaps the purest form of diligence. Historians still debate whether pre-modern observers intuitively recognized this stage. Diaries and treatises mention night's quiet work, or the mind arranging its thoughts in sleep, hinting at early recognition of deep sleep's functional importance. You are now submerged, held by layers of internal processes that leave no trace in consciousness. Deep sleep, memory triage, emotional integration, all unfold without fanfare, preparing you for the next cycle of dreaming, recollection, and waking life. The night shifts once more, imperceptibly. You drift from deep, restorative sleep toward lighter stages, and the familiar hum of REM cycles beckons again. Your body remains immobile, a passive observer to the electrical storms quietly igniting within your brain. A mainstream fact anchors this moment. REM sleep, characterized by rapid eye movement, heightened brain activity, and vivid dreaming, is essential for memory integration and emotional regulation. During these cycles, the hippocampus communicates extensively with the neocortex, subtly embedding the night's experiences into long-term storage. Here is a quirky insight. During REM, your brain selectively rehearses emotionally significant memories while pruning irrelevant details. In other words, it edits the day's story, amplifying what matters and discarding what doesn't. Some neuroscientists liken this to running a mental highlight reel, without your awareness, without your control. Historians still argue whether folklore describing nocturnal visions, prophetic dreams, or messages from spirits were early interpretations of REM activity. Ancient texts hint that people noticed altered states during the night, yet lacked tools to measure electrical patterns or hormonal surges. Your dreams are increasingly narrative, though logic remains optional. Characters, locations, and events morph without regard for consistency or physics. You may fly one moment and be grounded the next. Time folds and stretches. Even causality is negotiable. The mind's emotional circuitry drives the story. The conscious editor is on break. Physical paralysis continues to safeguard you. Your muscles are inhibited at the spinal level, preventing enactment of dream activity. It is a marvel of evolution, vivid simulation without real-world consequences. This separation between experience and action allows the mind to explore complex scenarios safely. A curious fact: external stimuli, like a faint noise or light change, can weave themselves into dreams, appearing as though naturally part of the narrative. Your brain incorporates the world in subtle ways, blurring the line between inside and outside without ever waking you fully. Emotions remain exaggerated. Fear, joy, surprise, or frustration feel intense, sometimes absurdly so. This amplification likely primes responses for real-life situations, honing empathy, judgment, or problem-solving capacity in a rehearsal-like environment. Memory tagging is selective. Scenes charged with novelty or emotion are prioritized. Mundane details often dissolve into the void. You wake remembering fragments or feelings, but rarely complete sequences. This selectivity explains why people can recall the emotional tone of dreams without narrative clarity. Some fringe theories suggest that REM cycles allow the brain to simulate potential futures, mental training grounds for decision-making. Others contend that dreams are merely epiphenomena of memory consolidation. Historians still argue whether recorded anecdotes of lucid prophecy were coincidence or early observation of this cognitive rehearsal. You remain in a state of suspended consciousness, fully immersed yet disconnected. Awareness may flicker briefly, but the machinery of memory is still calibrating. Sleep, invisible and profound, continues its unseen work, quietly shaping the next day even before it arrives. The night carries on, rhythmically and relentlessly, bridging deep sleep, REM, and waking life in a continuous flow of unseen labor. Morning creeps closer, though you remain unaware. Your body has been cycling through deep sleep and REM, refining memories, balancing emotions, and clearing metabolic waste. Even in this liminal state, your mind is still active, weaving threads of experience into a coherent, if invisible, tapestry. A mainstream fact anchors this. The final hours of sleep often feature longer REM periods. These extended cycles maximize memory consolidation and emotional processing, reinforcing both what you learned yesterday and the lessons embedded in dreams. It is a quiet, vital preparation for consciousness. Quirkier details emerge here. During these late-night REM phases, the brain is particularly susceptible to external cues. A faint alarm, a distant conversation, or a shift in light can blend seamlessly into dream narratives. Ancient cultures sometimes interpreted these intrusions as signs or omens, though we now know they are simply sensory signals integrated into ongoing mental simulations. Historians still argue whether reports of prophetic dreams in medieval and Renaissance texts were reflections of actual REM intrusions or interpretive storytelling. Either way, the correspondence is fascinating. Human curiosity about sleep and memory is centuries old. Your body begins its gentle return to waking rhythms. Heart rate, breathing, and temperature adjust, signaling the parasympathetic system to yield gradually to sympathetic activation. Muscles regain subtle tone. Eyes may flicker beneath lids, anticipating light. You are poised on the edge of consciousness, suspended between two worlds. Dreams at this stage are often more coherent, emotionally vivid, and sometimes even absurdly logical, compared to earlier REM cycles. Memory pathways are more active, allowing for partial recall. You might awaken with a fragmentary story, a fleeting image, or a strong emotion that lingers like perfume. Here's a curious point. Even micro-awakenings, brief moments when consciousness flickers, can anchor dream content into memory. These tiny bridges between sleeping and waking allow the brain to selectively preserve some fragments while discarding others. The rest vanishes, unrecoverable. The emotional tone of the night continues to influence cognition. Subtle mood shifts, resilience, creativity, anxiety modulation are products of the integrated nightly rehearsal. You feel them but rarely know their source. Your mind has practiced, rehearsed, and edited for you, invisibly. Historians still debate whether people in pre-industrial societies recognized these morning effects intuitively. References in diaries and medical texts suggest an awareness that sleep shaped mood, decision-making, and productivity, even if the biological mechanisms were unknown. You may now sense your body stirring, the pull of the waking world becoming more pronounced. Conscious thought edges in, logical reasoning flickers, and the brain begins re-establishing control over action. Yet the night's work lingers subtly. Memories are tagged, emotions tempered, associations formed, all quietly sculpting the day to come. And finally, you are poised to awaken, carrying the invisible results of hours of unseen labor, the night's private orchestration largely hidden from conscious recollection. The cycle is not over. It will resume tomorrow, repeating the delicate dance between unconscious processing and waking life. You awaken, though not fully, your consciousness still tinged with remnants of the night. The world feels slightly unreal, as if you are hovering between sleep and waking. Colors are sharper, sounds clearer, yet some textures of the dream world cling, like morning mist over a river. A mainstream fact anchors this threshold. The brain transitions gradually from REM and deep sleep into full wakefulness, a period known as sleep inertia. During these minutes, cognitive performance is reduced, memory recall is partial, and reaction times are slower. The brain has begun rebooting, but not all systems are online. Here's a quirky detail. The first thoughts you have after waking are often the most creative. This hypnopompic creativity emerges because neural inhibition is still low, allowing unusual associations to surface freely. It's why some artists, writers, and inventors report insights immediately upon waking. Historians still argue whether classical accounts of divine inspiration or sudden wisdom in dreams might reflect this hypnopompic window, rather than mystical intervention. Ancient observers were noting the same neurological phenomena we now measure scientifically. Your memory of the night is fleeting. You may recall fragments, a color, a face, a feeling, But the initial moments of falling asleep remain a blank canvas. The brain never recorded them in a retrievable form. Those first minutes, the delicate shift into unconsciousness, are largely invisible, unmemorized, and already erased. Emotion is your strongest remnant. Lingering anxieties, subtle joy, or a faint sense of relief can shape mood, decisions, and perceptions. Your brain has processed, rehearsed, and integrated experiences without your awareness, and you feel the after effects without knowing the cause. Physiologically, your body is re-engaging with the world. Muscles regain tone, core temperature rises, and the cardiovascular system ramps up for daytime activity. The parasympathetic dominance of sleep yields gradually to sympathetic readiness for motion and cognition. A curious fact: some researchers suggest that the mind continues to consolidate sleep-dependent memories for several hours after awakening. Even as you drink coffee or check messages, your brain is quietly filing, tagging, and rehearsing. Consciousness resumes, but memory work lingers, hidden in plain sight. You may notice strange gaps or inconsistencies in recall. Some dreams evaporate instantly. Others persist as vague feelings. This selective retention is intentional, a feature of efficiency rather than flaw. The brain prioritizes what is emotionally or practically significant, discarding the rest. Historians still debate whether historical accounts of "dreams remembered in fragments" reflect a genuine selective memory or storytelling embellishment. Either way, the pattern aligns with modern neuroscience. Sleep shapes memory and emotion, yet the transition moments, falling asleep and early sleep stages, remain largely unrecalled. And so, you are awake, or almost awake. The night's invisible labor has concluded for now, leaving you with the scaffolding of memory, emotional processing, and subtle insights, though the precise path remains invisible to you. By now you are fully awake, though the morning feels like a continuation of the night rather than its end. Thoughts begin to organize. Tasks and obligations assert themselves, and the world regains sharpness. Yet beneath this apparent clarity, the brain carries the night's silent work. Consolidated memories, rehearsed emotions, and rebalanced neural networks. A mainstream fact reminds you: the prefrontal cortex is fully online, coordinating attention, planning, and decision-making. Meanwhile, the hippocampus has completed much of its nocturnal dialogue with the neocortex, embedding experiences into long-term storage. You are walking through the consequences of a process you never saw in action. Quirky insight, some of your most vivid flashes of intuition today. The sudden solution to a problem, the unprompted recall of a forgotten detail, stem directly from nocturnal processing. Your brain rehearsed, recombined, and optimized these scenarios while you were unaware, making them seem miraculous. Historians still argue whether pre-modern accounts of dreams influencing decisions or foretelling events were early attempts to describe this cognitive phenomenon. It is possible that our ancestors were noting the brain's invisible overnight work without knowing the mechanics. Your memories of the night itself remain elusive. You probably cannot recall the precise moment you fell asleep, the first fragments of dreams, or the quiet emotional adjustments that occurred. This is by design. The brain treats the transition into sleep as a transient state not meant for conscious retrieval. Yet, the effects are measurable. Emotional regulation, learning retention, problem-solving efficiency, and creativity are all influenced by these hidden processes. Even without direct recall, you reap the benefits of the night's unseen labor. Here is a fascinating tidbit. Naps can mirror these processes on a smaller scale. Short periods of sleep allow memory replay, emotional recalibration, and glymphatic cleansing, miniature rehearsals of the full nocturnal routine. It is sleep's subtle generosity, repeating its magic in smaller cycles. your day unfolds atop the architecture built during the night. Decisions, perceptions, and mood are subtly scaffolded by processes you cannot access. The brain has been editing, pruning, rehearsing, and refining, all without your conscious participation. Historians still debate the extent to which ancient humans understood this hidden labor. Descriptions of mind preparing for the day in sleep appear repeatedly, suggesting a practical, experiential awareness even in the absence of modern neuroscience. And so, the cycle continues silently and relentlessly. Each night you fall asleep, memory consolidates. Each morning you awaken, you carry the invisible results. The transition, the very act of slipping into sleep, is rarely recalled, yet it is essential. The brain, tireless and unseen, performs its nightly symphony, shaping who you are, what you remember, and even how you feel. Long before your consciousness can take credit, you step into your day, bearing the gifts of sleep, the fruits of memory rehearsal, and the quiet echoes of the dreams that will mostly remain a mystery. The process repeats, night after night, invisible, indispensable, and entirely extraordinary.